first time Emma heard the knock, it came from inside the walls. Emma Clark, 28, moves into apartment 3B, an old pre-war building tucked away on a quiet city street. She's desperate for a fresh start after leaving behind an abusive relationship. The landlord, Mr. Feldman, is an elderly man with a polite but oddly distant demeanour. The building is cheap, creaky, and smells faintly of mildew and old wood, but it's hers. On her first night, exhausted from unpacking, Emma lies awake listening to the building sigh. Pipes clank, floorboards creak. Then, just past 2 a.m, she hears it. A soft, deliberate knock, not at her door, but inside the bedroom wall behind her headboard. Startled, she sits up, heart hammering. It comes again. Knock. 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 A pause, then silence. She tries to laugh it off. Old pipes, maybe a rat in the walls, but she can't shake the feeling that the knock wasn't random. It felt intentional. Emma settles into a routine. New job at a bookstore, awkward small talk with neighbours she rarely sees. Apartment 3B is drafty, but she tries to make it warm. Candles, cosy blankets, old records. But every night at exactly 2:07 a.m, the knocking returns. Sometimes soft, sometimes frantic, always from within the same wall. She complains to Mr. Feldman, who just nods vaguely. Old buildings make noises, dear, nothing to worry about. His eyes flick to her unit number, then away. Emma becomes fixated. She taps back at the wall one night, 3 knocks. The silence that follows is so complete she almost laughs at herself. But then a whisper threads through the drywall. "Help me!" She jerks away. She didn't imagine that. The next night the whisper comes again, clearer, urgent. "Emma, please." How does it know her name? Emma barely sleeps. She researches the building's history. An old boarding house turned apartments in the 1940s. No record of anything unusual. She tries talking to neighbours, but they're tight-lipped or evasive. One old woman in 2A mutters, "Walls remember things. Some doors shouldn't be opened." Emma pushes her bed aside, presses her ear to the wall. The voice is there, fragile, sobbing. In the dark, can't breathe. One night she snaps. She takes a hammer and starts chipping away at the plaster. Behind the wall is brick and a faint draft. She notices an outline, a bricked-up door. Mr. Feldman catches her the next morning, dust everywhere. His calm mask cracks. "You don't want to open that. Let sleeping things sleep." Emma ignores him. She finds old blueprints. There was once a connecting room, a hidden servant's closet, a secret passage. Obsession swallows her fear. On a stormy night, Emma smashes through the last layer of brick. Behind it, darkness. She shines her phone's light, a tiny windowless crawlspace. Dust, old scraps of cloth, rotting boards. The smell hits her, sour, stale, a grave that was never blessed. In the corner she sees scratches on the brick, fingernail marks, and something else. Bones. Small. Human. Emma stumbles back, retching. She calls the police. They find remnants of a child, missing since the 1950s, never found. The police question Feldman. He claims ignorance, but the detective's offhand comment chills her. Not the first bones we've found in these walls over the years. Emma tries to leave. She books a hotel, but that night, in the hotel bed, she hears it. Knock, knock, knock. She wakes to find the hotel room door ajar. Her phone lights up. "You can't leave me here." She flees back to 3B to finish it. She tears open the wall further, desperate to understand. The apartment feels alive, cold air whispering across her skin. Shadows move where shadows shouldn't be. She finds an old ring buried in the rubble. As she picks it up, a cold hand closes over hers. A pale, translucent child staring at her with hollow eyes. "You found me. Don't leave me here. Please." Emma's vision blurs. Memories not her own flood in. The child bricked in alive, the landlord's father sealing the room, the generations of silence. Emma does what no one did. She calls the child by name found on an old missing poster, Lila. She promises to bring her peace. She gives the bones a proper burial. The police open an investigation. The last night in apartment 3B is different. At 2:07 a.m. there's no knock, only a warm breeze. the scent of lavender, a quiet thank you in the dark. Emma moves out the next morning. As she drives away, she glances in the rearview mirror and swears she sees Lila standing by the window, free at last. Months later, another woman moves into 3B. She laughs at the creaky floors and the drafty walls. Her first night is uneventful, until just past 2 a.m. She sits up, frowning. Knock, knock, knock. Second story, when the lights came back on. It began with a storm. A thunderstorm so fierce it made the power grid flicker all over the sleepy town of Dorchester Hollow. Hannah Morgan, 34, a night shift nurse just home from a grueling double, stumbled through her tiny kitchen, lighting candles when the lights went out for the third time that week. Her apartment building, one of those drafty old brick monsters from the 1920s, was always the last to get power back. Tonight, the wind rattled her windows so hard she jammed an old chair under the handle just in case. Outside, lightning flashed. Inside, the living room flickered with warm candlelight. Hannah curled up on her thrift store couch, eyes half closed, listening to the rain hammer the roof above her top-floor unit. That's when she heard it. A faint, deliberate knock. Not at her door, but on the window behind the drawn curtain. She froze. She lived on the 3rd floor. Another knock. 3 slow taps. She whispered to herself, wind, just the wind. She stood, padded across the creaky floorboards, heart thudding. She lifted the curtain edge. Nothing but rain streaming down the glass. Relief. Then, in the reflection of her window, she saw it, a silhouette, standing in her darkened kitchen. She spun around. The candle flickered, revealing nothing but an empty counter, a dripping sink, the shadow of her fridge. She held her breath, ears straining. A floorboard creaked in the hall. Hannah grabbed her phone, dead, of course, and edged toward the kitchen drawer where she kept a rusted old paring knife. She heard it again, a step, slow and deliberate, coming closer. But when she turned the corner, the hallway was empty. Then, all at once, the power flicked back on. The lights buzzed to life, the fridge hummed, the TV screen glowed static. Hannah sagged against the wall, the knife slipping from her grip. She never saw the shadow slip into her bedroom. 2 days later, the storm was gone, but the unease lingered. Hannah tried to brush it off. Maybe the exhaustion was catching up with her. She worked nights after all. People hallucinated under enough stress and no sleep. But things started moving around the apartment. Small things at first. Her keys weren't on the counter where she swore she left them. The fridge door slightly ajar, though she knew she'd closed it tight. One morning, she found muddy footprints on her living room carpet. They led from the front door to her bedroom. The door had been locked. She checked twice every night. She even bought a new deadbolt. But the footprints were there, small, bare feet. She called the landlord, a balding man named Phil, who lived in Unit 1A. Phil trudged up the stairs, sighed when she showed him the prints and muttered, "Kids break in sometimes. Neighbourhood's not what it was." "Barefoot in a storm, in my locked apartment," Hannah snapped. Phil just shrugged. "I'll check the locks." "You want me to call the cops?" But she knew the answer. What would she say? There's something living in my walls, something knocking on my window 3 stories up. That night, Hannah lay awake listening to the pipes groan. She drifted into a shallow sleep, the kind where every creak jolts you back. Somewhere around 3 a.m, she heard a soft scuffling, like bare feet sliding over linoleum. She held her breath, hoping it was the cat, then remembered she didn't have a cat. She sat up, straining to hear over the hum of her old radiator. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Quiet as she could, she slid out of bed, grabbed her phone, this time fully charged, and crept down the hallway. The kitchen light was off, but the fridge door was open again, its dull bulb casting a ghostly glow on the cracked tile. A shape moved behind the fridge door. Small, thin, shifting in the shadows. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. She flicked the light switch, and the shape vanished. The fridge door swung shut by itself. The kitchen was empty. The floor was wet with muddy footprints again, tiny feet pointing toward the basement door in the back hall. The door was open an inch. Hannah forced herself to look. The basement stairs vanished into pitch black. She slammed the door shut, jammed a chair under the knob, and didn't sleep a wink. Morning came grey and heavy. Hannah called in sick. She sat at her table with 3 cups of cold coffee in front of her, staring at the basement door. When she finally opened it, she found the old wooden stairs slick with moisture. The smell hit her first. Damp, sour, mouldy. She descended slowly, her phone flashlight bobbing. The basement was just what you'd expect. Concrete floors, rusty pipes overhead, forgotten boxes mouldering in corners. But at the far end, behind an old water heater, she found it. A crawlspace door, half hidden under torn insulation. She knelt and tugged it open. Cold air rushed out, carrying a smell like wet earth and rotting leaves. She shined her light inside and saw a nest of blankets, filthy clothes, empty cans, and in the far corner, scrawled on the concrete wall in a child's shaky hand, "I am still here." A soft sound behind her made her turn. A whisper, so close she felt the breath on her ear. "Don't tell him." She spun around. No one. She bolted back up the stairs, heart hammering so hard she thought it would tear out of her chest. Hannah didn't sleep again. She waited for the shape to come back, for the soft knock, the whisper. It didn't come that night, or the next. But every morning she found something new. A child's toy, a wooden block, on her pillow. A single muddy handprint on her bathroom mirror. A low hum coming from the vent above her bed, like a lullaby. Desperate, she asked Phil again. He avoided her eyes. "It's just rats, Hannah, old building." "Rats don't write on walls," she snapped. He stiffened. "You should move out. Don't cause trouble, all right? Some places remember things." Hannah dug into the building's history. She found old newspaper clippings at the library. The building had been a boarding house in the 1940s. There were rumours, children who disappeared, a caretaker who was never arrested but always suspected. His name was Philip Morton, same last name as her landlord. Hannah confronted Phil that night. She stormed down to 1A and banged on his door until he opened it, robe and slippers, face pale and slack. "Tell me who's in my walls," she hissed. Phil's eyes darted to the hallway, then back at her. "Go back to your apartment, Hannah. I found the crawl space. I know about the kids." Phil's lips trembled. "Not my fault. My father. It was him, not me." She stepped closer. "There's still someone down there." Phil's face crumpled. He's not gone, Hannah. He never really left." He shut the door in her face. Hannah knew she couldn't stay. She packed her bags, but before she could leave, the storm came back. Sheets of rain pounding her windows, wind howling through the building's cracks. The lights flickered, then died. Total darkness. In that pitch black, the knock came again. Not on the window this time, but right behind her bedroom door. 3 slow knocks. She held her phone up, but the battery was dead again. The doorknob rattled. She stepped back. The door creaked open an inch, just enough for her to see a small face peering through the crack. Pale, hollow eyes, wet hair clinging to its forehead. A child. A boy. His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't let him find me." Then, a shadow behind the child, huge, towering, a man or something that used to be a man, grinning in the dark. Hannah slammed the door, jammed a chair under it. She grabbed her bag, ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The deadbolt twisted, but the door stayed shut like something was pressing it closed from the outside. She heard footsteps in the hall, heavy, dragging. The child's voice came from the walls. "The basement, Hannah. The basement." She ran for the basement door, flung it open, stumbled down the slick stairs, flashlight flickering. She crawled through the hidden passage, deeper and deeper, until she found a crumbling old door. She shoved it open and burst into the rain-soaked night. She ran down the alley barefoot, thunder crashing above. When she turned back, the apartment building loomed like a tomb, every window dark except for her bedroom. In it, she saw the child standing there, and behind him, the shadow grinning. Hannah never went back. The police found the crawl space, old bones, scraps of clothes, a nest where someone had been hiding for decades. They arrested Phil, but he never spoke again. They found journals in his father's handwriting, details of children bricked in alive, hidden in the walls to muffle their screams. The building still stands. Some nights when the power flickers and the storm rolls in, people say they see a small face at the window of apartment 3B, waiting for someone to listen when the lights come back on. The first time Eli Bishop heard the voices under his floorboards, they were whispering his name. He was standing barefoot in his half-finished kitchen, the smell of fresh paint sharp in the cold air, when a single word rose up from the darkness between the joists. Eli. Just once, soft as breath. Then silence. He told himself it was the wind in the crawl space, or the old pipes rattling again. But in the pit of his stomach he knew it wasn't. Main character. Eli Bishop, 36. A stubborn, independent ex-journalist who's left the city after a messy divorce to renovate a century-old house on the outskirts of an abandoned mill town. He's running from debts and memories he doesn't talk about. He tells himself he's here for peace and quiet, but the silence is the worst part. Eli unlocks the front door of the sprawling but decrepit Victorian. Cold air rushes out. The house feels alive. Cobwebs, peeling wallpaper, warped floorboards that creak like sighs. He finds weird things in the crawl space, tiny handprints in the dust, a child's marble, an old rag doll with its face scratched out. At night, lying awake on a squeaky cot, Eli hears scratching under the floorboards, then faint voices murmuring. They grow louder when the wind howls through broken windows. He checks for raccoons or rodents, sets traps, sprinkles flour to check for paw prints. Nothing, no sign of life, but the voices come back at 2:14 a.m. every night, whispering his name. Damp wood smell, rotting wallpaper, cold drafts seeping through cracks. The forest outside rattles the window panes at night. Flashback, Eli's ex-wife calling, begging him to sell the place and come back. He ignores her voicemails. The town's only grocery clerk warns him, "This place eats people." Unexpected. Knock. One night, a knock at the front door. A woman in her 50s soaked in rain. She's Mrs. Doyle, an old neighbour who says she used to babysit the kids who lived here. A story. Over coffee, Mrs. Doyle talks about the house, how the original owners, the Whitlocks, vanished one winter in 1927. Only the youngest child, Ruthie, was found, under the floorboards. More clues. Doyle warns Eli. They say the Whitlocks never left. This house don't like to let go. Rising fear. That night, the voices whisper louder. Eli swears he sees small shadows darting in corners. Cold spots form where he stands. He begins to record the noises on an old tape recorder. Atmosphere. Rain hammers the roof. Candlelight flickers. Dust motes swirl like ghosts when Eli moves through the hallways. Discovery. In the crawl space, Eli finds an old metal hatch sealed with rusted bolts. Beneath the boards, the dirt is freshly disturbed, decades-old secrets waiting. First descent. He forces the hatch open. A narrow tunnel plunges into darkness. The air is foul, damp, earthy, the smell of wet soil and decay. Into the dark. Eli descends with a flashlight, finds an old root cellar filled with broken furniture, rotting blankets, children's shoes, a child's bed frame chained to the wall. Whispers solidify. The whispers become voices, an entire family echoing through the dirt. Eli sees fleeting visions, pale faces pressed to earthen walls, eyes wide and hollow. First contact, a child's voice whispers in his ear, "Daddy's still down here." He turns, but there's no one. He flees back up the ladder, but the hatch slams shut behind him on its own. Atmosphere, claustrophobic, earthy smell, wet roots dangling like veins. The flashlight beam flickers as the voices rise in a ghostly chorus. Isolation. Eli tries to leave, but his truck won't start. His phone won't pick up a signal. The nearest town is 20 miles down a snow-choked road. Madness or memory. Flashbacks show Eli's guilt. He once wrote an expose that ruined a man's life and career. The man died by suicide. Eli lost his job. His marriage crumbled. Breaking point. The voices whisper his sins at night. He's down here with us. You belong here too. Physical haunt. furniture drags across floors on its own. Doors slam, windows frost over from inside. The cold burns his breath. Shadows flicker at the edges of the candlelight. Descent again. Desperate, Eli goes back down the hatch to end it. He brings a shovel and begins digging deeper into the root cellar floor. Dirt turns to bone fragments, then something wet. A mummified corpse clutching an old notebook. It's the father's confession. He killed his family to keep them safe from the sins of the town. Revelation. Eli realizes he's been chosen to finish what the father started, or become part of it. Atmosphere. The entire house groans. Cold winds push from cracks in the walls. The smell of damp rot mixes with sweat and fear. The collapse. The final storm hits. The roof leaks. Power lines snap outside. The floorboards buckle under Eli's feet as if the house is breathing him in. The family appears. He sees the ghostly Whitlocks. The father, mother, Ruthie. Their eyes black voids, skin pale and cracked. They beg him to stay, to lie down beneath the floorboards like they did. The climax. The hatch bursts open. Wind howls up from below. The father's spirit drags Eli by the ankle. Eli fights, kicking dirt and bones, clawing at the splintering wood above. A choice. He can lie down, or set fire to it all. He crawls up, gasoline in hand, breath ragged. He torches the hatch, the floor ignites, smoke choking the whispers to silence. Escape. Barefoot in the snow, Eli staggers outside as flames eat the house from inside. He watches the roof collapse, embers swirling like dying fireflies. Days later, rescue crews find Eli at a roadside diner, barely conscious, frostbitten but alive. He's silent as they question him, but in his pocket he grips Ruthie's old marble. He tells himself it's over, but that night, in his motel room, the floor creaks open under the bed. The soft child's voice drifts up through the carpet. Eli. Deep sensory detail, rotting wood, cold drafts, wet earth. Natural dialogue with tension and layered secrets. Cinematic pacing, quiet dread scenes, spikes of terror, emotional backstory. The first time Eli Bishop heard the voices under his floorboards, they were whispering his name. He stood barefoot in the centre of what would soon be his kitchen, though right now it was just an open wound of half-ripped linoleum and raw plywood that creaked and flexed with every shift of his weight. The bitter smell of fresh primer stung his nose. Outside, the wind clawed at the plastic sheeting he'd duct-taped over the broken window panes, and through the rattling he heard it, clear as his own heartbeat. Eli. He froze. The brush in his hand dripped a line of paint onto his jeans. He turned slowly, eyes tracing the baseboards, the corners, the shadows cast by the single bare bulb that swung on its cord overhead. Nothing. He held his breath. The house settled, its old beams popping and sighing in the cold. He heard the wind slip under the eaves, but the voice didn't come again. Not yet. He told himself it was exhaustion. He'd driven 14 straight hours from Chicago to the middle of upstate New York in one shot, only stopping for a stale gas station sandwich that sat heavy in his stomach. The real estate agent had given him the keys and vanished. Didn't even bother coming inside with him to do a walkthrough. That should have been his first clue. The place looked good in the listing photos, sunlight slanting across weathered wood floors, an old clawfoot tub gleaming under dusty beams. But up close, every floorboard told the truth. Water damage under the carpet he'd ripped up, black mould in the corners of the kitchen ceiling, the faint smell of mildew clinging to the walls no matter how many windows he cracked. Eli dropped the brush into the paint tray and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. His head throbbed. He glanced at his phone on the counter. No bars. Out here, 5 miles past the last gas station, the forest swallowed signals like the house swallowed heat. He shuffled to the old fridge he'd dragged out of storage. It hummed, a low-dying rattle. He cracked a beer, leaning on the chipped counter while cold air seeped through the window gaps and brushed the back of his neck. For a moment he felt like someone was standing behind him, so close he could feel their breath. He turned, again, nothing but the plastic sheeting shuddering in the wind. Get a grip, he told himself. It's an old house, that's all. He drained the beer, left the empty bottle on the counter, and trudged upstairs to the only room he'd cleaned well enough to sleep in. It had taken 3 days and half a box of contractor bags to clear out the old furniture left behind. Broken chairs, a warped dresser, cardboard boxes filled with mildewed clothes and yellowed newspaper clippings. He'd found a child's drawing tucked between 2 floorboards, a stick figure family under a crooked roof, dark scribbles covering what looked like a basement door. He'd burned it in the backyard pit without thinking. That first night he lay on a squeaky camping cot wrapped in 2 blankets staring at the cracked ceiling. He could feel the cold crawling up from the floor, stealing warmth from his bones. The wind outside rose and fell like distant breathing. Every now and then, the O. The first time Eli Bishop heard the voices under his floorboards, they were whispering his name. He stood barefoot in the centre of what would soon be his kitchen, though right now it was just an open wound of half-ripped linoleum and raw plywood that creaked and flexed with every shift of his weight. The bitter smell of fresh primer stung his nose. Outside, the wind clawed at the plastic sheeting he'd duct-taped over the broken window panes, and through the rattling he heard it, clear as his own heartbeat. Eli. He froze. The brush in his hand dripped a line of paint onto his jeans. He turned slowly, eyes tracing the baseboards, the corners, the shadows cast by the single bare bulb that swung on its cord overhead. Nothing. He held his breath. The house settled, its old beams popping and sighing in the cold. He heard the wind slip under the eaves, but the voice didn't come again. Not yet. He told himself it was exhaustion. He'd driven 14 straight hours from Chicago to the middle of upstate New York in one shot, only stopping for a stale gas station sandwich that sat heavy in his stomach. The real estate agent had given him the keys and vanished. Didn't even bother coming inside with him to do a walkthrough. That should have been his first clue. The place looked good in the listing photos. Sunlight slanting across weathered wood floors, an old clawfoot tub gleaming under dusty beams. But up close, every floorboard told the truth. Water damage under the carpet he'd ripped up. Black mould in the corners of the kitchen ceiling. The faint smell of mildew clinging to the walls no matter how many windows he cracked. Eli dropped the brush into the paint tray and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. His head throbbed. He glanced at his phone on the counter. No bars. Out here, 5 miles past the last gas station, the forest swallowed signals like the house swallowed heat. He shuffled to the old fridge he'd dragged out of storage. It hummed, a low dying rattle. He cracked a beer, leaning on the chipped counter while cold air seeped through the window gaps and brushed the back of his neck. For a moment he felt like someone was standing behind him, so close he could feel their breath. He turned, again, nothing but the plastic sheeting shuddering in the wind. Get a grip, he told himself. It's an old house, that's all. He drained the beer, left the empty bottle on the counter, and trudged upstairs to the only room he'd cleaned well enough to sleep in. It had taken 3 days and half a box of contractor bags to clear out the old furniture left behind. Broken chairs, a warped dresser, cardboard boxes filled with mildewed clothes and yellowed newspaper clippings. He'd found a child's drawing tucked between 2 floorboards, a stick figure family under a crooked roof, dark scribbles covering what looked like a basement door. He'd burned it in the backyard pit without thinking. That first night he lay on a squeaky camping cot wrapped in 2 blankets staring at the cracked ceiling. He could feel the cold crawling up from the floor, stealing warmth from his bones. The wind outside rose and fell like distant breathing. Every now and then, the O. The lead pipes groaned, or maybe it was the floorboards under the crawl space shifting. At 2:14 a.m. he woke to the sound again, faint like the rustle of paper under his mattress. Then Eli. His name drawn out slow like a question. He held his breath, straining to hear. The house settled, the pipes clanked. His heart beat so loud he thought it might drown out whatever was down there. He sat up, the cot squealing under him, and swung his legs onto the cold floor. The voice was gone. He listened for another minute, every muscle tense. Nothing. He told himself it was the wind under the floorboards. The old crawl space hadn't been sealed in decades. Maybe a raccoon or possum had found its way under there, or a squirrel. Something small with tiny feet and restless claws. That's all it is, he told himself. But he didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, frost rimmed the inside of the window by his cot. He could see his breath. He pulled on his boots and old flannel and went outside to check the crawlspace hatch. It sat half buried in wet leaves and moss at the side of the house, a rusted metal door hanging crooked on its hinges. He grabbed the edge and heaved it open. A sour, earthy smell rose up like breath from a grave. He shined a flashlight down the short flight of crumbling stone steps. Dirt. Cobwebs. The remains of an old cardboard box. No sign of life. No eyes gleaming in the dark corners. No scampering feet. The only footprints were his own, from the day he'd peeked in before signing the deed. He closed the hatch, the hinges screaming in protest, and forced the latch shut with a brick. He spent the rest of the day patching the kitchen ceiling, trying to ignore the steady drumbeat in his chest. When the sun dipped behind the trees, the shadows in the corners grew thick and stubborn. He turned on every light in the house, but the place still felt dim, like it swallowed the bulbs whole. His phone vibrated, buzzing across the counter. No signal bars, but somehow a voicemail icon. He pressed play. It was his ex-wife, Lacey. "Eli, I know you're there. I hope you're safe. I wish you'd answer my calls. Look, I know you won't listen, but please don't stay in that place alone. I have this feeling, I don't know. Call me back, please." He deleted the message halfway through. He didn't need her pity. He didn't need her voice in this house, lingering like a draft. That night the voices came back, but this time they didn't whisper his name. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling when he heard it, the faintest scrape of nails on wood just beneath his pillow. Then a soft, steady chant, not in any language he knew. Low, rhythmic, like a lullaby hummed through rotting floorboards. Eli sat up, heart hammering in his chest, sweat prickling his scalp despite the cold. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to the dusty planks. He could almost make out words. Children's voices, giggling. He leapt up, grabbed his flashlight and stormed downstairs. He stomped through the kitchen, threw open the hatch again, and aimed the beam into the crawl space. Nothing. Just the same stale smell of damp dirt and mould. No footprints, no scurrying vermin, no kids hiding in the shadows. He slammed the hatch shut so hard the old stone cracked at the corner. Upstairs, something laughed, high and clear like a child playing hide and seek. The visitor. The next morning the snow came. It wasn't much at first, just a light dusting that powdered the cracked porch steps and drifted against the warped screen door. But by noon the wind picked up, carrying flurries sideways through the leafless oaks and into the corners of the old Victorian sagging roof. Eli watched from the kitchen window as the world turned white, muffled and still. He stood in the kitchen holding a cup of stale black coffee, the chill from the floorboards crawling up his bare ankles. He'd slept for maybe an hour, just long enough to dream of the voices whispering under his bed. Only this time they were louder, urgent, a chorus of children's laughter that rose and rose until it felt like the house itself was giggling in its sleep. He pressed the mug to his lips. The coffee had gone cold. The knock startled him so badly he spilled half of it down his flannel sleeve. He cursed, set the mug down, and turned toward the front hall. There it was again. 3 slow knocks, so soft they might have been someone testing the wood with their knuckles. He wasn't expecting anyone. He told exactly no one where he was going, except the bank and the real estate agent. The nearest neighbour was a mile up the old mill road, an empty farmhouse that had been dark every night since he got here. The knocks came again, more insistent. He thought of the stories you heard out here, drifters sleeping rough, squatters looking for shelter. He ducked into the corner by the door, grabbed the crowbar he'd left leaning there since moving day, and inched to the peephole. What he saw made him hesitate. A woman, mid-50s, maybe older, hard to tell through the blur of snowflakes swirling around her scarf. She wore an old peacoat and boots caked in slush up to the knees. Her gloved hands clutched the collar of her coat tight against the wind. But when she saw movement behind the peephole, she raised one mitten and gave a shy wave. Eli cracked the door just enough to stick his head through the gap. "Can I help you?" She peered at him with eyes so sharp and clear they made him feel like he'd stepped naked out into the snow. "You must be Mr. Bishop." He didn't answer that. "Do I know you?" "No, but I knew this house. I was hoping—" A voice caught in the cold. She took a breath, tried again. "I was hoping I could come inside for just a moment. I used to babysit here, long ago, back when the Whitlocks were still—" She didn't finish. Her eyes drifted past him, into the dim hallway behind his shoulder. "It's colder than it looks today." Eli hesitated. He glanced at the wind howling down the empty road. He didn't like the thought of letting a stranger in. but the thought of sending her back out into that cold felt worse. He stepped back and opened the door wide. "Come in." She moved past him like she'd crossed this threshold 100 times before, stepping carefully out of her boots, brushing snow from her coat sleeves. Up close, Eli saw her skin was pale and thin as paper, her hair a halo of wiry grey under a faded wool hat. She smelled faintly of mothballs and pine. "Thank you," she said, tugging off her gloves. She held out a hand. "Dorothy Doyle. Folks around here just call me Mrs. Doyle." "Eli," he said, not bothering with the rest. She nodded like she already knew. She wandered into the front hall, pausing to trace a fingertip along the cracked wood panelling, the water stains that bled down the faded wallpaper like veins. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're fixing it up, I hear." "That's the idea." She gave a small hum of agreement, like she didn't quite believe him. "Ambitious." She turned back to him. "I live up on the ridge, next to the old mill. Been there all my life. Saw your truck a few days back. Thought I'd come say hello when the weather turned." Eli bristled. Small town. That's one word for it. She looked at him again, more carefully this time, taking in the half-painted walls, the boxes still stacked by the stairs, the sagging couch draped with a ratty blanket. "You sleeping here alone?" Eli crossed his arms. "Is that a problem?" Mrs. Doyle just shook her head, a sad, soft smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "No, dear. Just a question." She wandered into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Eli followed, uneasy. She stopped at the fireplace, a hulking black iron thing that hadn't seen a flame in decades. She ran a hand over the cold grate. "Used to be a good house," she said, "full of life. Back when I was just a girl, my mother would send me down here to watch the Whitlock children when she took in mending for Mrs. Whitlock. They were sweet kids, so polite. You wouldn't know it now, looking at this place." Eli leaned against the doorway, watching her. What happened to them? She didn't look at him, just kept tracing the mantelpiece with her fingertips, brushing dust onto the hearth. That's what folks always wanted to know. Winter of 27. Snow like this, only worse. Came down for days, cut this whole hill off from the main road. No one could get in or out for near a week. When it finally let up, the postman found the door hanging open, snow piled knee-high in the hallway. She turned then, her eyes locking with his. They found Mr. Whitlock first, up in the attic, swinging from the rafter. Mrs. Whitlock was in the parlour, pills, they said, and the two older boys. She hesitated. Well, they never found the boys. Eli's skin prickled. And the youngest? Her mouth twitched, something almost like pity passing over her face. Ruthie. She was 6. They found her under the floorboards in the nursery closet, curled up like she was sleeping. She paused. She'd been dead at least a week. A silence stretched between them. The wind moaned through the window gaps, rattling the loose panes. Eli cleared his throat. "And what? People say it's haunted? Is that what you're here to tell me?" Mrs. Doyle gave him a look that made him feel like a child again. The look an old neighbour gives when they catch you lying about the broken window. "I'm not here to tell you ghost stories, Mr. Bishop. I just thought you should know what this place has in its bones." "I'm not scared of stories. Maybe you should be." She asked him for a cup of coffee. He poured 2 mugs of the stale brew. They sat across from each other at the wobbly kitchen table, the cold seeping up through the floor into their boots. "Do you ever hear them?" Eli asked, surprising himself with how casual he made it sound. Mrs. Doyle tilted her head. "Who?" He tapped the side of his mug with a fingernail. "The Whitlocks, or whatever's left of them." She watched him over the rim of her mug. "Do you?" He didn't answer. Mrs. Doyle set her cup down. "I'll tell you what I know. This house, it doesn't like to let go. People move in, they swear they hear things. Children's feet, a woman crying in the attic. Sometimes the snow comes down and no one sees the new folks again until the thaw. Maybe they're fine, maybe they're not." Eli forced a laugh. "And you just let people keep buying it?" "People do what they want, Mr. Bishop. The bank doesn't ask me before they sell a house. And some people," she said, fixing him with that sharp stare again, "some people don't want to listen when you try to tell them. They think they know better." A gust of wind slammed the loose window shutter against the side of the house. Eli jumped. Mrs. Doyle didn't flinch. She drained the last of her coffee and rose. "I should go before the road ice is over. You'll be all right, Mr. Bishop. Long as you remember. Houses like this, they remember you back." She pulled on her gloves and boots, tightening her scarf at the door. Eli opened it for her, the wind knifing in, cold and sharp as a scream. She stepped onto the porch, turned back once. "You ever need anything?" she said. "I'm up on the ridge, third house past the mill. Just knock." He watched her shuffle down the front steps, her boots leaving soft dents in the fresh snow. She didn't look back. When she disappeared into the swirling flurries, Eli shut the door and leaned his back against it, breath fogging in the cold. Upstairs, he thought he heard the faint sound of a child humming. That night, the wind screamed louder than ever. The snow piled high against the porch, drifted under the doors, seeped cold into the rooms. Eli lay on his cot, flashlight clutched to his chest like a talisman. At 2:14 a.m, the voices returned. They didn't whisper his name this time. He pictured the child Mrs. Doyle spoke of curled up in the dark under the boards, tiny hands pressed against the planks, waiting. His last thought before sleep claimed him, heavy and merciless, was that maybe he should have burned this place down the day he got the keys, digging down. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It came down in fine bitter flakes that stuck to the windows like salt crusting a wound. Eli watched the drifts pile higher against the porch steps, burying the tyre tracks in his driveway, until it looked like no one had ever come here at all. He spent the first day pacing the house, every board creaking under his boots like a protest. He told himself the voices were nothing. Cold air, old pipes, a trick of exhaustion and grief he'd dragged with him from Chicago. But at night, they came back, and each time, they brought more. The second night, he woke to something tapping his forehead, a steady, cold drop of water leaking through a crack in the ceiling above his cot. He lay there in the dark, counting each drop like a heartbeat. He thought he heard breathing beneath him, not whispers now, but the slow rasp of lungs in the walls. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of Ruthie. In the dream, she was standing at the foot of his cot, her hair matted to her small skull, her nightgown stained and torn. She didn't speak. She just raised one pale hand and pointed at the floor beneath him, then at him, then back at the floor again. When he sat up gasping, the room was so cold his breath came out in clouds. By the third morning, the power flickered and died with a sharp snap that left the whole house humming with an unnatural silence. Eli lit candles, dug out his old camping lantern, and sat at the kitchen table with the only thing he could find in the pantry, stale saltines and a half-eaten jar of peanut butter. He forced them down while the wind moaned through the eaves, carrying with it scraps of voices that might have been memories, or might have been the house trying to talk to him. By dusk, the crawlspace hatch had become an obsession. He found himself circling it over and over, tapping the rusted latch with the toe of his boot, listening for something that moved when he knocked. At 2:14 a.m, like clockwork, the voices came back, drifting up through the seams in the planks. This time they were clearer. Not just his name, not just Ruthie's, a whole conversation half-formed, drifting up through the cold floor. He pressed his ear to the boards, his breath freezing against the old wood. He heard a man's voice, deep, weary. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone turned his stomach to ice, then a child's giggle, quick, bright, echoing in the darkness beneath him. He sat back, heart hammering. The wind rattled the shutters like bony fingers drumming to be let in. He made up his mind. By lantern light, Eli gathered what he needed. An old crowbar, a folding shovel he'd brought from his city apartment for gardening he'd never done, and a half-dead flashlight duct-taped where the battery cover had cracked. He dressed in layers, 2 flannels, a hooded sweatshirt, his old ski jacket. He pulled on gloves, thick socks, boots still crusted with salt from the drive upstate. The hatch groaned when he pried it open. The cold air that breathed out of the crawl space smelled like wet earth and something sour, something old enough to make his teeth ache. He swung his legs down the stone steps, the lantern's glow painting wavering shadows on the dirt walls. His boots sank an inch into the damp clay. The ceiling was so low he had to hunch his shoulders. Cobwebs brushed his cheeks. Something skittered away into the dark. The crawl space was smaller than he remembered, more like a shallow, unfinished root cellar. A single line of rotted support beams crossed the dirt floor like the ribs of a half-buried skeleton. In the far corner under a sagging joist lay a warped sheet of plywood. The dirt around it was darker than the rest, disturbed, sunken in places, as if it had been turned over and patted down again and again. He felt the whisper before he heard it, a pressure in his head, like the cabin of an airplane just before it pops. Then a child's voice, close enough he could almost feel breath on his ear. "Down here." He snapped the flashlight beam to the corner. Nothing moved, but the air felt colder there, the dirt darker still. He dropped to his knees. The plywood creaked when he set his weight on it. He could see the outline of old nails hammered in a sloppy square. He ran a gloved hand over the boards. They shifted under his palm, brittle from decades of damp rot. He hesitated. The flashlight flickered. Something brushed his ankle. Just a mouse, probably. Or not. He slid the crowbar under the edge of the plywood and pushed. The nails shrieked as they tore free. A blast of stale, frozen air puffed up into his face, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of something long buried. Beneath the plywood, dirt. Just dirt. Darker, damper, packed tight. But the smell told him there was more. He set the crowbar aside, picked up the shovel, and began to dig. The work was harder than he'd thought. The earth sucked at the blade with every scoop. He scraped down a few inches at a time, the metal edge striking roots, stones, something that rattled like old glass. Every few minutes he'd pause, listening. The crawl space seemed to breathe with him, each exhale echoing off the dirt walls like a sigh. Somewhere above him, the wind battered the house, but down here it was silent except for the sound of steel-biting soil. After an hour, sweat dripped down his spine despite the freezing air. He was a foot down when the shovel struck something that didn't belong. A dull thud, not stone, not wood, something softer. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the loose soil with his gloves. His fingers brushed canvas, rotten burlap, stiff with age. He tugged, and the dirt fell away to reveal the outline of a sack tied with brittle twine. He hesitated, breathing hard. The lantern flickered. The shadows at the edge of the pit seemed to lean closer. He pulled the sack free. The twine fell apart under his fingers. He peeled it back. Inside were bones, small, bird-like, not fully formed. He counted tiny ribs, a fragile arm, the curve of a skull that would fit in his palm. He recoiled so fast he nearly hit his head on the low joist. The sack dropped at the edge of the hole, its contents spilling into the dirt. A soft giggle echoed in the darkness behind him. Not playful this time, but mean, hungry. He spun the flashlight around. The beam caught only dust motes and rough clay walls. He knew he should leave it, call someone, the county sheriff, the state police, anyone, but he couldn't stop. Something deeper than curiosity kept him kneeling there, shovel in hand, pushing deeper. An hour later, his arms burned with exhaustion. He'd opened a space the size of a small bathtub. The dirt was streaked with darker patches, old fluids maybe. A sour stink rose every time the blade bit deeper. He found more burlap, more bones, a child's shoe, cracked and mouldy, a scrap of cloth that might once have been a nightgown. The pattern faded to ghost colours, then beneath it all wood. He scraped until he found the edge of a small square hatch, a door, barely wider than his shoulders, set into the earth itself. He pressed his ear to it. No voices now, just the slow thump of his own blood in his head. He should have stopped. Every cell in his body told him to seal it back up, nail the plywood shut, run out into the snow and never look back. Instead, he slipped his fingers under the edge of the hatch and lifted. The hinges screamed. The smell that rose out of that black hole slammed into him like a wave. Old meat, mildew, something sweet and rotten all at once. He gagged, turned his head, breathed through his sleeve. He swung the flashlight beam down into the hole. It caught on dirt walls and something else. A pair of eyes reflected back at him, pale and glassy, wide open in a face half sunk into the clay. A man's face, skin stretched thin over bone, lips pulled back in a grimace that might have been a scream or a grin. One skeletal hand clutched a mouldy leather-bound notebook pressed to its chest. Eli fell back, landing hard on the cold clay. His flashlight skittered away, beam dancing over the pit. The lantern flickered, shadows warping into impossible shapes. Behind him, he felt a cold hand brush the back of his neck. A voice, the man's voice he'd heard in the floorboards, whispered, clear as day. "We're waiting, Eli." He should have run. Eli knew it the moment the thing's eyes met his, those pale, sunken sockets staring up from the earthen crypt. His body told him to scramble up the crawlspace ladder, slam the hatch, run barefoot through the drifts if he had to. But he didn't. He sat there in the dirt, breathing in that rancid air like penance, the lantern flickering as if the darkness itself was sucking its life away. The corpse's hand still clutched the notebook. Its fingers were brittle twigs wrapped in yellow parchment skin, but they gripped the cover tight, as if it wanted Eli to take it, or dared him to. Eli reached out, hand trembling so badly the shadows seemed to shiver with him. When his glove brushed the mummified knuckles, the bone cracked. The notebook slipped free, landing on the dirt with a soft, final thud. He snatched it up, shoved it inside his jacket, and crab walked away from the pit until his boots hit the stone steps. He didn't look back, not at the eyes, not at the hatch yawning open behind him, like a throat waiting to swallow. Up in the kitchen, he slammed the crawlspace door shut so hard the hinges screamed. He dragged a cabinet over the hatch, wedged it in place with the crowbar. It wouldn't hold, he knew that, but it gave him something to do with his shaking hands. The storm howled against the windows. Snow rattled the panes like skeletal fingers tapping to be let in. The lantern's flame danced madly on the chipped countertop as Eli tore off his gloves, flipped open the notebook, and forced himself to look. The first pages were brittle, water-stained, half illegible. Faded ink scratched in a cramped, frantic hand, Mr. Whitlock's maybe, or someone before him. He squinted, tracing each line with his finger. The floorboards whisper when it's cold. Ruthie sees them first, says they're cold hands under her bed. The crawlspace won't stay sealed, the soil breathes when I sleep. Page after page, confessions, ramblings, half-mad scribbles about a door beneath the earth, a throat that fed on warmth, on blood, on memory, sketches of the floor plan, marks where the hatch lay hidden. A single word repeated like a prayer or a curse. Stay. The last entry chilled him most. They keep her quiet now, but when the snow locks the road, they'll come for the rest. If you find this, God forgive you. Stay down there with them or run. Eli's breath came in ragged pools. He slammed the book shut so hard the flame in the lantern guttered. Something in the walls giggled. A high, sharp sound like a child's laugh echoed through pipes that hadn't worked in years. He grabbed the lantern, stumbled to the front door. The knob froze his palm through his glove. He twisted, shoved his shoulder into the door as it didn't budge. He dropped the lantern on the hall table and threw the deadbolt, then slammed his boot against the jamb. The old frame cracked, but the door wouldn't open. Snow had drifted high outside, so high it pinned the warped screen shut. He ran to the back door, same thing, packed with snow, nailed in place by winter's cruel fist. He turned to the windows next, but the frost was so thick it might as well have been concrete. The storm had sealed him in. He was trapped in a box made of rotting wood and ancient secrets. A whisper at his ear, warm breath on the back of his neck. Stay with us, Eli. He spun, swinging the lantern like a weapon. The beam caught only dust motes and peeling wallpaper. He stumbled to the staircase, feet pounding up the creaking treads 2 at a time. In his room, he slammed the door, pushed the cot against it for good measure, and crouched by the single bare bulb that flickered overhead. His breath came in short, frozen clouds. He cracked open the notebook again, desperate for answers. The pages fluttered in the draft that seemed to blow from the floor itself. On the last page, something new glared back at him. Fresh ink, wet and glistening. Eli, stay. Stay. Stay, stay. The words multiplied, bleeding through the paper like veins. He threw the notebook across the room. It landed under the cot. He didn't reach for it. That night, the house stopped pretending. At 2:14 a.m., as if summoned by the ticking of some buried clock, the voices rose, not whispers now, full-throated, giddy, cruel, children giggling, a man's sobs deep and choking, a woman humming a lullaby that turned into a rasping scream. The floor under Eli's cot thumped. A knock, deliberate, rhythmic, then another, then dozens, as if small fists were pounding from below. The bulb overhead pulsed, dimmed, died. Darkness swallowed him whole. In the pitch black, Eli pressed his palms over his ears, but the knocks grew louder, closer. He felt the cot shift beneath him, felt felt the cold draft licking up between the boards, carrying with it the same rotten sweetness that clung to the pit below. He heard the giggle again, a child right under his mattress. "Play with us, Eli." He bolted upright. The cot legs scraped the floorboards. The knocks stopped. Sudden, absolute silence that roared in his ears. Then, a single, gentle voice. A girl's. So close it might have come from inside his own skull. "Please, open the door again." He bolted for the hall. The darkness was thick as tar, swallowing the flicker of the lantern he'd left on the table below. He half fell, half ran down the stairs, boots slamming on old wood. At the bottom, the hatch waited, the cabinet he'd wedged over it now pushed aside as if by careful, patient hands. The metal door lay open. A low hum rose from the crawl space. Not the wind, not the pipes, but a voice so deep it vibrated his bones. A chorus joined it. The man, the child, the woman, layered over each other until they formed one single whisper that crawled up his spine and settled in his skull. "Come see." He felt his feet moving before his mind caught up. He stepped into the cold draft, the lantern flickering in his shaking hand. The stairs into the crawl space yawned wide, so wide they seemed deeper than they had any right to be. He took the first step. The whisper pulsed in his veins. The floorboards above him moaned like a dying animal, the whole house shifting on its ancient foundation. Eli understood in that instant that he hadn't bought this house, it had bought him. Beneath the floorboards, Act 5, the root. First step down felt like stepping off a cliff. The lantern's glow barely reached the bottom of the crawlspace stairs. Beyond that, it was just black soil swallowing the flicker whole. The cold wrapped Eli's ankles, then his knees, then his gut, numbing him to the sweat that ran down his back. He paused at the edge of the pit, the same one he'd torn open hours before. The hatch still gaped wide like a rotten mouth, and the smell of wet earth and something older rolled up to meet him, thick enough to taste. He raised the lantern. The corpse in the pit stared back, the same wide, glassy eyes, the same parchment grin. But now there were more. Shapes pressed into the clay walls, faces half-formed, as if the earth had tried to swallow them but never quite finished the job. Some were so small they barely looked human, just the curve of a skull here, the suggestion of fingers there. And the whisper, that endless hush that was not wind or breath, rose through the roots and boards until it filled the crawlspace like a heartbeat. "Eli, come down, stay." He should have run. He told himself that with every thud of his heart, but his feet stepped forward anyway, boots sinking into the loose soil until he stood at the mouth of the hatch again. Inside, the tunnel waited. He hadn't seen it before, hadn't noticed how the pit burrowed deeper, an old root cellar or drainage shaft widened by decades of something gnawing at its edges. The walls were slick with black clay, thin roots dangled like wet hair. At the tunnel's edge, the earth pulsed, not literally, not really, but Eli felt it, a warmth inside the frozen ground like an open vein deep under the house. He lifted the lantern. A draft from the tunnel's throat nearly snuffed the flame. The whisper crawled up to meet him. He stepped in. The passageway forced him onto his hands and knees. The soil was so cold it burned through his jeans. His breath fogged ahead of him, merging with the steam that rose from deeper in the shaft. The lantern bumped the ceiling. Dirt sifted down the back of his neck like dry snow. Every few feet he found scraps, things the house hadn't finished eating. An old toy car rusted to flakes, a button-eyed doll half buried in the clay, scraps of cloth that might have once been pyjamas. He forced himself not to think about how deep he'd crawled, how far the house's hunger reached under the hill. When the tunnel widened, he nearly collapsed face first into empty space. He caught himself on trembling elbows and squinted past the lantern's flicker. He'd come to a cavern, rough clay walls shaped by hand or nature, impossible to tell. In the centre, roots, thick and gnarled, twisted around each other like a nest of serpents. They pulsed faintly, sap or something thicker oozing from their bark. Embedded in the roots were shapes, bone, cloth, scraps of teeth, all tangled tight like offerings, and beneath it all a hole in the dirt, deeper still, a black throat that breathed warmth and rot up into Eli's face. He heard Ruthie's voice, clear as any child standing behind him. Daddy went first. He spun. No one there. just the tunnel's wet walls closing behind him. Eli dropped to his knees beside the root tangle. He wanted to run, to retch, to scream for someone to break down the door and drag him out into the snow. But instead, he reached for the roots. They were warm, alive. They pulsed under his fingertips like a vein. He pressed deeper, ignoring the stink of sap and something that smelled too much like blood. Something shifted beneath the bark, a glint of glassy bone. A child's jaw caught in the knotted wood. When he tugged, the root gave way with a wet, tearing sigh. The jaw slipped free, landing in his palm. Baby teeth, tiny and perfect. He gagged, dropped it, wiped his hand on his jeans. The roots pulsed faster, oozing sap that dripped onto his boots. He felt the floor vibrate, a low, resonant hum that rose from the pit below the roots. It wasn't the house anymore. It was deeper, older. He realised in that moment what the Whitlocks had done. The father swinging from the attic, the mother on the parlour floor, the boys missing. Ruthie curled under the boards. They tried to seal this throat, to feed it, quiet it, smother it under floorboards and prayer. But the house had never been the prison. It was the mouth, and he was just the next breath. A shape rose behind him, or maybe inside him, he couldn't tell. It smelled like his childhood closet, like wet wool and stale fear. He heard Ruthie's voice again, but this time it was joined by the man, the father, and the mother's low, broken hum. Stay. Feed. Hush. Eli's fingers closed around the lantern's base. He realised then that he hadn't come here to dig. He'd come here to bury. He lifted the lantern to the nest of roots. The glass rattled in his grip. He thought of the notebook's final plea. Stay down there with them or run. He couldn't run. The door was snowed shut, the windows iced like tombstones. The only way out was down. He smashed the lantern against the roots. The flame bloomed so fast he barely had time to leap back. Oil hissed across the clay floor, igniting in tongues of blue and yellow. The roots caught like dry timber, sap boiling out in fat blisters that burst with a sickening hiss. Smoke filled the cavern, thick, choking, sweet with rot. The roots writhed in the flames, spilling bones and scraps of cloth into the fire like kindling. The whisper rose to a shriek, a chorus of giggles, sobs, lullabies all mangled together in a howl that pressed Eli's skull until his vision whited out. He scrambled for the tunnel, half blind, lungs raw with smoke. Behind him the nest cracked and roared. The clay walls buckled, the earth tried to swallow him back. He clawed through the shaft on elbows and knees, coughing so hard he thought he'd tear his throat out. The crawl space stairs swam into view through the haze. He hauled himself up, boots slipping, breath burning, and slammed the hatch behind him just as the fire roared through the pit below. Upstairs, the walls shuddered. Paint peeled from the ceiling in wet strips. The floorboards buckled under his boots, then settled, heavy, exhausted. Eli stumbled to the front hall. He pressed his palm to the door. The cold outside bit his skin. He could hear the storm fading, the wind losing its voice. He closed his eyes. He thought he heard Ruthie again, a whisper at the edge of his hearing. Thank you, then silence. The real kind. When the snowplow found him 3 days later, Eli was sitting on the front steps, coat zipped to his chin, boots caked in soot and ash. The house behind him sagged lower than before. One side half collapsed where the old crawl space had given way. Smoke stains rimmed the windows like hollow eyes. The driver leaned out of his cab, shouting over the rumble of the engine. Eli didn't hear him. He just sat there, staring at the tree line where the snow melted in dirty rivulets. When they asked what happened, the paramedics, the deputies, the tight-lipped county clerk, Eli just said one thing, over and over, voice raw and thin. It's quiet now. It's finally quiet.